Have you ever stopped to think about what law really is? I mean, not just the speed limits and the tax codes, but the actual idea behind it all? Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. The deep, philosophical questions that underpin every single law that shapes our lives.
And let's start with the biggest question of all, one that we almost never ask ourselves. Why should we obey the law? Seriously, why? Is it just because we're scared of getting caught? Or is there something deeper, some kind of moral obligation we have to follow the rules, even when nobody's looking?
You know that one single question? It kicks off one of the oldest and frankly most important arguments in all of human history. For centuries, the philosophy of law has basically been this epic clash between two giant, totally opposing ideas about what law even is.
And here they are, the two heavyweights in the ring. In one corner, you've got natural law theory. Its core belief that an unjust law isn't just a bad law, it's not a law at all. And in the other corner, you have legal positivism, which says, hold on a minute, law and morality are two completely separate things. A law is a law if it's made by the right people. Period.
Okay, so let's dig into that first camp. This is the ancient and incredibly powerful idea of natural law.
The fundamental idea here is pretty simple. There's a higher law out there. Whether you think it comes from God or from pure reason or just that little voice inside you that knows right from wrong, it doesn't matter. The point is, all of our man-made laws have to measure up to it. And if some government passes a law that's just plain evil, a natural law theorist would say, sorry, that's not a law.
St. Thomas Aquinas just nailed it with his quote. He didn't just see an unjust law as a mistake. He called it a perversion, like it's twisted the very soul of what law is supposed to be. That's a pretty strong statement.
Now, this might sound super abstract, right? But it was put to the test in the most intense way imaginable. After World War II, at the Nuremberg trials, you had Nazi officials on trial, and their defense was chillingly simple. We were just following the law. We were just following orders. But the prosecutors fired back with the pure natural law argument. They said these laws were so fundamentally immoral, so contrary to basic human dignity, that they weren't legitimate laws at all. And you know what? That argument won. It gave us the world-changing concept of crimes against humanity.
Okay, but not everyone was on board with tying law so closely to morality. In fact, a whole other school of thought popped up, pretty much in direct response, arguing that mixing the two is a recipe for disaster.
And this is legal positivism. The core idea here is that law is one thing and morality is another. For a positivist, the only question that matters is, was this law created by the proper authority through the proper process? It could be a terrible, immoral law, but if Parliament or Congress passed it correctly, then yep, it's a valid law.
The 19th century philosopher John Austin just laid it out there, plain and simple. What is law? It's a command from whoever's in charge, the sovereign, backed up by the threat of punishment. That's it. It's about power and procedure, not good versus evil.
And think about it with something really simple, like traffic laws. Is it morally better to drive on the right side of the road than the left? Of course not. The law is valid in the US simply because the US government says so. It's not valid in the UK because their government says something different. It's a perfect example of how law can just be a social convention, with no deep moral roots at all.
So we've got team morality over here and team power over there. But then a new group of thinkers came along and basically said, hey, you're both missing something huge. You're spending way too much time with your noses in books.
They asked this simple but kind of revolutionary question. What's the point of all these grand theories about what law should be if they don't actually describe what's happening in our courtrooms with our police every single day? And that brings us to legal realism. The realists argued that the law in the books is one thing, but the law in action is what really matters. For them, the real law isn't some dusty text. It's what judges and prosecutors and police officers actually do. It's a human process full of biases and practical realities.
And nobody said it better than the legendary Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. He basically said, if you want to know what the law is, don't look at a statute. Predict what a judge is actually going to do. That prediction, he said, is the law.
We've all experienced this, right? The real speed limit. The sign on the highway says 65 miles per hour. That's the law in the books. But if everybody knows that the cops won't pull you over unless you're doing 80, well, a legal realist would say the real law is 80, because that's the one that's actually being enforced.
So, you might think the story ends there.
right? Natural law, positivism, realism. But nope. The conversation just kept going, evolving into even more fascinating and challenging modern theories. Take critical legal studies, or CLS. They took the realist idea that law is what officials do, and they pushed it way further. They argue that law isn't just accidentally biased, it's designed from the ground up as a tool for the powerful to keep things just the way they are.
And in a similar vein, feminist jurisprudence asks us to look at how the law has historically been written by men for men. It challenges us to see the ways, both obvious and subtle, that our legal system reflects and reinforces a patriarchal point of view. Okay, so we've been through a whirlwind of theory, and you might be sitting there thinking, that's interesting, but what does any of this have to do with me? Well, it has everything to do with you. Because these ideas aren't just for academics and ivory towers. They are the invisible software running our entire society. Understanding this stuff gives you a powerful new toolkit. Now you can question the laws you live under, not just on the surface, but at their very foundation. You can start to see the hidden philosophical ideas behind big court decisions. And you can have much, much smarter conversations about what justice and fairness really mean. Which brings us right back to the beginning, to that first big question. But now you can see it in a whole new light. If a law is deeply unjust, is it your duty to break it? A follower of natural law, a legal positivist, and a legal realist would all give you completely different answers. The only real question left is, what's yours?